In the quietest corners of Middle-earth, there exists a people of small stature and gentle hearts, hobbits. Known for their love of food, peace, and the warmth of home, these little folk would come to shape the fate of the world in ways no one, not even the wisest of elves or the most ancient of wizards, could have foreseen. But before Bilbo's journey to the Lonely Mountain, before Frodo bore the ring into Mordor, there was a time when hobbits were not known to anyone. Not to men, not to dwarves, and not even to the elves, who remember more than any other race still dwelling in Middle-earth. And so, to understand the hobbits as they are in the time of the War of the Ring, we must first return to the mists of their beginnings, an era lost even to song and legend. Tolkien himself acknowledged that the exact origins of the hobbits are cloaked in mystery. Unlike the grand tales of the elves awakening at Cuiviénen or the shaping of dwarves by Ale, the emergence of the hobbit seems to occur quietly, like a forgotten song humming softly through the grass. They first appear in the histories around the year 1050 of the Third Age, but even then, they are described as already having existed for quite some time. Where they came from, and exactly when, remains uncertain. What little we do know comes from the collected lore of the Shire folk themselves, fragments of stories passed down in taverns, family halls, and quiet evenings beside the hearth. It is said that the hobbits are distantly related to men. This connection, while vague, is supported by their mortality and their apparent resistance to the corrupting power of the One Ring, which suggests some deeper resilience within them. Yet the hobbits are no ordinary branch of men. They are a unique kind, having developed their own customs, languages, and way of life, hidden away from the broader events of the world. Long before they arrived in the Shire, hobbits lived east of the Misty Mountains, in lands along the upper Anduin River. This region, nestled between the towering peaks and the great greenwood, later called Mirkwood, served as their earliest known home. It was a place of wide fields, rivers, and forest borders, where the hobbits could live in peace, undisturbed by the dealings of the larger world. They lived in small communities, relying on farming, fishing, and the simple joys of life. Even during this early time, hobbits were divided into three distinct groups: the Harfoots, the Stoors, and the Fallohides. Each group had its own tendencies and favored landscapes. The Harfoots were the most numerous, living in foothills and valleys. They were smaller, darker of hair, and most inclined to settle in burrows. The Stoors preferred rivers and wetlands. They were broader in build, with larger hands and feet, and had a deeper fondness for boats and swimming. The Fallohides, meanwhile, were the least numerous but often the most adventurous. They were fairer in skin and hair, and they enjoyed the company of elves and the deep woods of the north. These early divisions would later influence much of Hobbit culture and lineage, shaping the great families of the Shire and beyond. As the shadow of evil grew in the east slowly and silently during the Third Age, the hobbits began to migrate. Around the year 1050, they began to cross the Misty Mountains westward, fleeing darkness and pressure from encroaching forces they could not name. Though this was long before the full return of Sauron, the signs of his stirring influence were enough to disturb even the most peaceful of lands. The greenwood had begun to darken, and tales of strange creatures were whispered by men who dared venture too deep into the forests. It was a slow and cautious migration, but one that would ultimately reshape their destiny. Crossing into Eriador, the hobbits encountered lands more suited to their temperament: rolling hills, quiet rivers, and pockets of fertile earth. It was here they began to establish a more permanent presence, though they still lived somewhat under the notice of larger folk. At this time, hobbits settled near Bree and the surrounding countryside. The village of Bree, inhabited by both men and hobbits, would become one of the few places where both races lived together in harmony, side by side. And yet, even in these early days, the hobbits remained reclusive. They avoided entanglement in the affairs of kings and lords. They had no great armies, no legendary cities, and no burning ambition for conquest or dominion. Instead, they sought only to be left in peace, to till their land, share in good food, and raise families with quiet dignity. Their leaders were rarely warriors or monarchs, but rather the heads of large families, respected for wisdom, fairness, and a good sense of humor. This unassuming lifestyle made them nearly invisible to the great powers of Middle-earth. And for the hobbits, this was precisely as they liked it. By the time they reached the lands that would become the Shire, they had already lived quietly in Eriador for several generations. In the year 1601 of the Third Age, the great migration westward came to an end when two Fallohide brothers, Marcho and Blanco, received permission from the King of Arnor to settle the land between the Brandywine River and the Far Downs. This moment marked the official founding of the Shire, the beating heart of Hobbit culture for centuries to come. But even at the moment of their arrival in the Shire, Hobbits had no written records of their earliest days. Their prehistory was lost to time, held only in vague memory and fireside tales. They did not know of their deeper ancestry, nor of their place in the grand tapestry of Ilúvatar's creation. And yet, perhaps this forgetfulness was a kind of blessing, for while the elves mourned the fading of their glory, and men hungered for power and legacy, the hobbits remained grounded, rooted in soil, in story, and in the unchanging rhythms of the earth beneath their bare feet. In many ways, the mystery of their origin reflects their nature. Hobbits are not a people concerned with great beginnings or epic destinies. They care more for what is near, the bloom of a new flower, the smell of fresh-baked bread, and the comfort of a well-worn chair at the end of a long day. And yet, in the simplicity of their ways lies a quiet strength, one that would come to light in the most unlikely of times. So the hobbits, forgotten by history and unknown to the wise, lived quietly for centuries. The world moved on around them. Kingdoms rose and fell. Wars burned the sky, and the shadow in the east gathered strength. But in the green lands of Eriador, in homes dug deep into hill and earth, the hobbits waited, until, at last, the time came when the smallest of them would be called upon to bear the greatest burden, and their long-forgotten history would become the stuff of legend. Long before the rolling green hills of the Shire were tilled and settled, before the party tree stood in Hobbiton, or the name Baggins was ever known, the hobbits lived a scattered, quiet existence east of the Misty Mountains. They were already a distinct people by the time they appear in recorded history around the year 1050 of the Third Age. But even then, they were divided into three unique tribes, three branches of the same gentle folk, shaped by the land, water, and wood they called home. The Harfoots, Fallohides, and Stoors. These were not mere families or houses, but whole subcultures within Hobbitkind, each with their own traits, customs, and favored habitats. Though they would one day merge in the peace of the Shire, they began as separate peoples, each carving out their own way of life in the ancient world. Let us begin with the Harfoots. They were the most numerous of the three, and perhaps the most Hobbit-like in the image most are familiar with today. Harfoots preferred the highlands and hills. They were nimble-footed and smaller in build, often with darker hair and skin than the others. Among the three tribes, they were the most rustic, the most traditional, and the most deeply rooted in the soil. Harfoots were the original hole-dwellers living in the sides of hills and burrowing into the earth, a habit that would later define the architecture of the Shire. They distrusted boats and large bodies of water, preferring the solid embrace of land beneath their feet. Their societies were simple, tight-knit, and centered around farming and foraging. They avoided the other races of Middle-earth when possible, and preferred to remain hidden from the eyes of men and elves alike. They lived quiet lives, close to nature, and far from trouble. Next were the Stoors. Broad-faced, strong-handed, and stockier in frame, the Stoors lived near rivers and wetlands. They were the most likely of the hobbits to use boats, to swim, and to fish. Their appearance was often noted as being closer to men in build, and they were said to have a deeper voice and a certain bluntness in speech. The Stoors were a more rugged people, dwelling along the Anduin River, near the borders of the forest that would later become Mirkwood. Unlike the Harfoots, the Stoors were not averse to interacting with outsiders, and some even lived among men for periods of time. Because of their river-bound lifestyle, Stoors retained knowledge of watercraft and navigation skills rarely seen among other hobbits. They also held onto old customs that the Harfoots and Fallohides had long abandoned. It is from the Stoors that one of the most fateful figures in all of Hobbit history would eventually emerge, Smeagol, later known as Gollum, whose tragic path began on the banks of the Great River. Lastly, we come to the Fallohides. They were the least numerous of the three tribes, but perhaps the most curious, the most daring, and the most open to the world beyond. Tall for hobbits, often fair of skin and hair, the Fallohides preferred woodlands and forests to open plains or rivers. They had a deep appreciation for song, story, and craft, and were more inclined to leadership and exploration than their more reserved cousins. Unlike the Harfoots, the Fallohides were friendly with elves and often lived near their borders. They were known to be more adventurous, and in times to come, it would be Fallohide blood that often produced the boldest hobbits, the wanderers, the leaders, and the unlikely heroes. The Took and Brandybuck families, known for their eccentricity and bravery, traced their lineage directly to the Fallohides. These three tribes, though separated by geography and temperament, still shared a common identity. They all spoke variations of the same ancestral tongue. They shared a love of peace, of home, of good-tilled earth and warm food. They had no great lore of their own, no sagas of kings or epic battles, but they held tightly to stories passed down from mother to child, from elder to grandchild. Oral tradition was the heart of their history, and within it lived the memory of their migrations, their friendships, and their ancient fears. It was in Eriador that the slow blending of the three tribes began. Over generations, their differences softened. Harfoots mingled with Fallohides, and Stoors intermarried with both. Their customs combined, their languages began to shift, and their individual identities gave way to a broader Hobbit culture. Still, hints of those ancient divisions lingered in families and behaviors. The Tooks, proud and slightly strange, carried Fallohide blood. The Bagginses, sensible and reserved, were more Harfoot in nature. And Gollum, tormented and twisted by the ring, was unmistakably a Stoor in both voice and history. These tribal distinctions, though ancient, echo through the lives of hobbits even into the time of the War of the Ring. They shaped who hobbits were, how they moved, how they spoke, and how they viewed the world. In the Shire, where the blending was nearly complete, the cultural legacy of these divisions remained buried, visible only to those who knew where to look. A love of rivers here, an old family song there, a peculiar bravery that surfaced in times of need. By the time of Frodo and Sam, the ancient tribal lines were more myth than memory. Few hobbits would have called themselves a Harfoot or a Fallohide anymore. And yet, in their blood, in their habits, and in the stories passed down around the dinner table, the legacy of the early tribes lived on. It lived in the curiosity of Pippin Took, in the steadfast loyalty of Samwise Gamgee, and in the quiet courage of Frodo Baggins. These were not new traits, but ancient ones, carried forward from a time before the Shire, before the West, and before history had even taken notice. Thus, in the mingling of Harfoot, Stoor, and Fallohide, the Hobbit people were forged not in war or conquest, but in movement, in survival, and in an unyielding desire for a simple life. A life of gardens, of songs, of second breakfasts and twilight stories. And though the world would one day ask much more of them, it was this foundation, this quiet beginning that made the Hobbits who they were and who they would become. The story of the Hobbits is not merely one of origins or identity, it is also a story of movement, of journeying, and of seeking a place to call home. After centuries of quiet life east of the Misty Mountains, and then many more in the rolling lands of Eriador, the Hobbits, still overlooked by the great powers of Middle-earth, undertook a final migration. This journey would lead them westward, beyond the Brandywine River, into a region of gentle hills, green meadows, and whispering woods. There, they would found the land that would come to define their people for all time, the Shire. The migration was not sudden. It came slowly, almost as if drawn by an invisible hand. The Hobbits, having lived for generations in the lands of Eriador near Bree, in the South Downs, and along the White Downs had already begun to settle and blend into a more unified culture. The Harfoots were well established in the hills. The Stoors had made their way from the Gladden fields and found rivers and fertile soil to their liking. And the Fallohides, fewest in number but strongest in spirit, often became leaders or explorers in this new world. Yet the eastern parts of Eriador were not without danger. The kingdoms of Arnor, once mighty among men, had fractured and begun to fade. Wild things crept down from the north, and the whispers of old evil stirred in distant corners. The hobbits, sensitive to changes in the air and wary of the world beyond their gardens, sought peace in deeper lands still untouched by war or watchful eyes. They yearned for a home not just to live in, but to preserve untouched, undisturbed, and entirely their own. In the year 1601 of the Third Age, a pivotal event unfolded quietly, without grandeur, but with consequences that would ripple across the centuries. Two Fallohide brothers, Marcho and Blanco, obtained permission from King Argelab II of Arthedain, one of the last remnants of Arnor, to settle in the far western region of his realm. This land, lying between the Brandywine River and the far downs, was rich, green, and largely uninhabited. The king saw no harm in allowing a peaceful folk to farm and dwell there, and he granted them leave with a simple condition: that they maintain the roads and acknowledge the authority of the northern kingdom, should it ever need them. So it was that Marcho and Blanco led a great movement of hobbits across the Brandywine, or Baranduin, as it was called in the Elvish tongue. To the hobbits, the name became Brandywine, and the journey across its waters marked the beginning of something new. It was not merely the colonization of a land, it was the birth of a nation. A quiet nation, yes, without kings or armies, but a nation all the same, defined not by borders, but by a shared spirit, a common way of life, and a deep love for the land beneath their feet. They called their new home simply the Shire. It was a name of comfort, not of grandeur. The word itself implied peace, a safe place, a retreat, and that is precisely what it became. Within a few years, more hobbits followed, crossing the Brandywine and establishing farms, hamlets, and villages. The land was fertile and fair: rivers for fishing, forests for wood, hills for burrows, and fields for farming. It seemed as though the land had waited just for them. The Shire was divided into 4 regions, or farthings: the North Farthing, South Farthing, East Farthing, and West Farthing. Each had its own charm, its own families, and its own traditions, but they were all bound together by the invisible threads of hobbit life: shared meals, shared harvests, and shared stories. There were no large cities. The largest towns, Michel Delving, Hobbiton, and Bywater, were still no larger than quiet villages. The Shire did not need walls or fortresses. It needed only good soil, steady hands, and the turning of the seasons. Despite their new homeland, the hobbits maintained many of their ancestral habits. Harfoots built their homes into hillsides, creating the iconic smiles, or hobbit holes, that dotted the landscape. Stoors, more at ease on riversides, settled in places like Buckland, just east of the Brandywine. Fallohide families often took up leadership or ventured into less tamed corners of the land, pushing the edges of the Shire's quiet frontier. For centuries, the hobbits flourished in peace. The great road that once connected Arnor to other kingdoms remained, and the hobbits dutifully maintained it, as promised. But few travelers came, and even fewer sought to interfere in Shire matters. The world outside began to forget about the hobbits entirely, and that suited the little folk just fine. They governed themselves through the mayor of Michel Delving, and the tane of the Shire offices more ceremonial than political. Law was light, disputes rare, and the worst offenses often involved livestock, ale, or someone stealing another's prized taters. Even their language began to evolve. While the hobbits of earlier centuries had spoken in dialects closer to the mannish tongues of the north, the Shire folk slowly developed their own speech, their own naming traditions, and a unique calendar filled with festivals and feasts. The Yule, the Lithe Days, and the Harvest Festival became markers of the year, and life flowed with the rhythms of planting, growing, and celebrating. Yet, despite their love for simplicity and their apparent disinterest in the outside world, the hobbits were not foolish. They remembered stories, even if they did not write them down. They told tales of dark forests and strange creatures, of wars fought long ago, and kings who ruled distant lands. They knew the name of Elendil, even if they did not understand his deeds. And somewhere, beneath the layers of gardening, pipe smoking, and second breakfasts, the hobbits retained a quiet awareness that the world was bigger, stranger, and more dangerous than they would ever let on. This awareness, however faint, served them well. It made them cautious of strangers. It made them value peace and distrust ambition. And when the time came when a simple hobbit named Bilbo Baggins stepped out of his door and into the wide world, it was that deep, ancestral wisdom that gave him the strength to go on. He may not have known it, but behind him stood 1,000 years of hobbit history, a migration across rivers and mountains, a people who had chosen peace, but who had never forgotten the price of it. And so, in a land beyond the Brandywine, where no elf or man would ever think to look for heroes, the hobbits built a home. A home of green fields, warm fires, and stories passed down through generations. The Shire was not the beginning of the hobbit's story, but it was the place where that story took root and where it would one day rise into legend. In a world shaped by kings, wizards, and war, the hobbits of the Shire carved out something entirely different, a life of simple pleasures, quiet routines, and deep-rooted traditions. Far from the halls of Gondor and the towers of Rivendell, the Shire was a sanctuary, both in geography and in spirit. It was a land not defined by power or progress, but by the rhythm of the seasons, the tilled earth, and the comfort of community. To understand Hobbit culture is not merely to observe what they do, but to feel how they live deeply, patiently, and always with a touch of cheer. The most sacred values in Hobbit society were peace, stability, and predictability. Change was not something they welcomed with open arms. In fact, most hobbits found anything out of the ordinary to be mildly alarming and deeply suspicious. A strange visitor might be offered tea and biscuits, but he would be watched with a wary eye. Adventure was considered something best left to others, elves, dwarves, or men who hadn't the good sense to stay home. Hobbits found excitement in the turning of the leaves, in the arrival of a newborn lamb, or in discovering a new way to season mushrooms. These small joys, unnoticed by the rest of Middle-earth, were treasures in the eyes of a hobbit. Family was the foundation of hobbit life. Most hobbits lived in large, extended households that spanned generations. Grandparents, uncles, aunts, and cousins all lived nearby, sometimes under the same roof, often within walking distance. It was a rare hobbit who lived alone, and even then, he or she was likely to be surrounded by frequent visitors, gossiping neighbors, and curious young relatives. Respect for elders was deeply ingrained, not out of obligation but out of love. The wisdom of an old hobbit, even if limited to the best way to grow turnips, was treated like ancient lore. Their homes reflected their values: low, rounded, and inviting. The typical hobbit hole, or smile, was dug into a hillside and fitted with round doors and windows. Inside, the walls were lined with warm wood, shelves of books, and pantries that overflowed with food. A hobbit home was not built to impress, but to comfort. Armchairs were plush, kettles were always whistling, and a fire was always crackling. Guests were expected, and the pantry was never locked. Every smile had its own personality, often reflective of the family within. Some were neat and orderly, others chaotic and bursting with children, but all were unmistakably lived in and loved. Food was perhaps the most celebrated part of daily life. Hobbits didn't just eat meals, they honored them. There were 6 meals a day, and sometimes more if the occasion called for it. Breakfast, second breakfast, elevenses, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper, each one a chance to gather, to laugh, and to indulge. Hobbits were skilled farmers, bakers, and brewers. Their tables groaned under the weight of fresh bread, cold meats, roasted vegetables, and pies of every flavor imaginable. Ale flowed freely, as did tales and laughter. Cooking was both a necessity and a point of pride, passed down from parent to child as a sacred family art. The Shire's culture was also filled with festivals and celebrations that marked the rhythm of the year. Yule, held at the turn of the year, was a time of feasting and song. The Lithe Days, which fell between the end of June and the beginning of July, were celebrated with fairs, markets, and great outdoor gatherings. The Harvest Festival was another favorite and autumnal celebration of the land's bounty, with hay rides, pumpkin carving, and the sharing of harvest meals beneath lantern-lit trees. Birthdays were especially important in the Shire, not for receiving gifts, but for giving them. A hobbit celebrating a birthday was expected to give presents to friends and family, a custom that kept both generosity and surprise alive year-round. Yet with all their joy and festivity, hobbits were deeply private. They disliked being the subject of gossip, even as they eagerly indulged in it. They valued modesty, humility, and a good reputation. A hobbit who made too much noise, drew too much attention, or behaved oddly was considered a bit queer. This wasn't necessarily meant unkindly after all. Even Bilbo Baggins, after returning from his adventure, was still invited to parties, but it set one apart. Most hobbits, truth be told, were perfectly happy to never be noticed outside their own village. Still, the Shire had its leaders and its structures. There was no king, no standing army, and no fortress. But there were traditions of governance that ensured order and fairness. The Thane of the Shire was the nominal leader, a role once filled by the Old Bucks of Buckland and later held by the Took family. The Thane's duties were largely ceremonial by the time of the War of the Ring, but the title carried respect. More practical leadership came from the mayor of Michel Delving, who oversaw postal services, road maintenance, and local law. Sheriffs, more like constables or peacekeepers than warriors, helped resolve disputes and maintain order, though serious crime was exceedingly rare. Education in the Shire was informal. Most hobbits learned to read and write at home or from neighbors, if they bothered at all. Practical knowledge, farming techniques, cooking methods, and the family history was valued far more than book learning. The exception to this rule could be found among certain families, like the Bagginses or the Brandybucks, who kept small libraries and studied maps, histories, and elvish tales. For most, though, the written word was less important than knowing when to plant potatoes or how to raise a proper pint. Despite their modesty, hobbits had a love for beauty, especially in the natural world. Their gardens were famous across Eriador, riotous bursts of color filled with flowers, vegetables, and hedgerows pruned to perfection. They also appreciated music, especially flutes, fiddles, and rustic drums. Songs were a common part of daily life, whether sung while cooking, walking, or gathered by the fire in the evening. These songs were rarely of battles or heroes, but of seasons, love, and the pleasures of home. In all things, hobbits sought balance. They distrusted anything too large, too loud, or too fast. They cherished moderation, tradition, and the familiar. But that is not to say they lacked imagination. Beneath the surface of their routines lived a quiet curiosity. It flickered in the hearts of a few Tooks who dreamed of dragons, Bagginses who read tales of elves, and gardeners who looked westward toward the sea without knowing why. In the Shire, time seemed to move differently. Years passed like drifting leaves. Children grew up with muddy feet and bright eyes, surrounded by stories and songs. Life was predictable, yes, but it was never empty. Every field had a memory. Every tree held a secret. And every door, round and welcoming, opened to a world built not by conquest or ambition, but by generations of care. This was the Shire, a land of laughter and lullabies, of gentle hearts and stubborn roots, a place that the world would forget until the day it was needed. And when that day came, it would be these very values, peace, kindness, humility, that would carry its people into legend. To truly understand the world of the hobbits, one must slow down, not just in movement, but in thought, in rhythm, in the quiet unfolding of each moment. Hobbits live not by urgency or ambition, but by the natural flow of time, marked not by battles or treaties, but by the rising of the sun, the blooming of flowers, and the aroma of freshly baked bread wafting from open windows. Their lives were not ruled by clocks or councils, but by the earth itself. And nowhere is this harmony more evident than in their calendar and the way they shape their daily routines. The Hobbit calendar, known as the Shire reckoning, was simple, practical, and surprisingly accurate. It was based on the solar year, consisting of 12 months of exactly 30 days each, with a few additional holidays placed between months to bring the total to 365 days. The calendar was adopted shortly after the founding of the Shire, around the year 1601 of the Third Age, and it remained largely unchanged for centuries. The months were named in the Hobbit tongue and reflected the character of the seasons. Names like After Yule, Solmath, and Reth marked the end of winter and the slow thaw of early spring. Thrimage, Forlythe, and Afterlythe carried the promise of warmer days, while Wedmath, Hallowmath, and Winterfilth brought the golden glow of harvest and the first chill of fall. Blotmath and Foryule marked the cold and quiet time before the cycle began again. Between the months were a few special days outside of the usual weekly cycle meant for celebration and reflection. Chief among these were the Lithe days, which came between June and July. They were a time of great joy and merrymaking. In leap years, an extra day called Overlythe was added, a rare and cherished occasion, seen as particularly lucky for weddings, births, and new beginnings. At the end of the year, 2 Yule days marked the turning of the calendar, bookending the quietest season with songs, storytelling, and candlelight gatherings. Weeks in the Shire were 7 days long, just as in the rest of Middle-earth, and the days bore names familiar yet distinct: Sturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Heaven's Day, Mer's Day, and High Day. But for most hobbits, the actual name of the day mattered less than its place in the cycle of chores, rest, and community. A typical day in the life of a hobbit began early, often with the sun's first light filtering through circular windows. Hobbits were early risers, especially those who worked the land. Farmers, gardeners, and millers all began their work soon after dawn, with the soft sounds of rakes, hoes, and water wheels joining the morning breeze. A hobbit breakfast was never a rushed affair, hearty and satisfying. It included eggs, bacon, mushrooms, fresh bread, and pots of tea or cider. Not long after breakfast came second breakfast, a beloved tradition that filled the gap before elevenses, a small late-morning meal shared with neighbors or enjoyed while out in the fields. These meals weren't just about eating, they were about pausing. Hobbit meals served as markers throughout the day, a way to slow down and savor life's simple pleasures. Luncheon followed elevenses, often the heartiest meal of the day, and was followed by a short rest or nap. Afternoon tea, taken around 4, was light and refreshing, and provided a chance to catch up with friends and local gossip. Dinner and supper rounded out the evening, sometimes merging into one long, joyous feast, especially on holidays or birthdays. Between these meals, hobbits busied themselves with a kind of work that was never hurried, but always meaningful. Gardeners tended rows of vegetables and flowers, pride evident in the careful trimming of a hedge or the health of a pumpkin vine. Farmers tilled their fields, checked livestock, and chatted along country lanes. Craftsmen and tinkerers mended carts, built furniture, or worked with leather, metal, and wool. No one rushed. There was time for everything, and everything had its time. Children played in the open meadows or under the eaves of the woods, their laughter ringing out like birdsong. They climbed trees, splashed in creeks, and listened to the tales of their elders, wide-eyed and eager. Learning for them came not from books or formal lessons, but from observation, repetition, and endless questions. They learned to plant seeds, to bake, to tie knots, and to spot the signs of changing weather, all the knowledge they would need to someday take their place in the rhythm of Shire life. Evenings in the Shire were particularly cherished. As the sun dipped low and the sky blushed with gold, hobbits gathered indoors. Fires were lit, kettles boiled, and families came together. Stories were told not of far-off lands or terrible beasts, but of relatives, old family jokes, and the sort of tales that grew taller with every telling. Songs were sung, sometimes with flutes or fiddles, but often just with voices rising together in harmony. Windows glowed with soft light, and the scent of pipeweed drifted lazily from porches and hearths. Weekends brought special rituals, market days in towns like Bywater or Hobbiton, where carts rolled in with fresh produce, tools, and baked goods. Weddings, birthdays, and seasonal fairs filled the green with dancing, games, and tables heavy with treats. These gatherings were moments of community, where stories and laughter were exchanged as freely as gifts. Yet for all their social nature, hobbits also valued solitude and quiet moments. A walk through the woods, a quiet afternoon in the garden, or time spent whittling or knitting by a sunny window, these were the quiet treasures of life, and each hobbit knew them well. There was no shame in doing nothing if one was doing it peacefully. The Shire had no real clock towers, and few hobbits wore watches. Time was told by the sun, by the angle of shadows, by the bird's song at dawn and the crickets at dusk. It was a timekeeping born of nature, of instinct, and of familiarity. Days were not measured in seconds or deadlines, but in loaves baked, rows planted, songs sung, and mugs emptied. In the broader world, where men marched to war and elves walked the paths of memory, the hobbits' simple days might have seemed trivial, but in that simplicity lay something profound. The hobbit way of life was a quiet resistance against the chaos of the world. It was a declaration that joy could be found in a well-made pie, that peace could be preserved in the hum of bees and the rustling of cornfields, and that time, when allowed to unfold gently, revealed the deepest truths of all. And so, day after day, year after year, the hobbits lived anchored not by urgency, but by tradition, by community, and by the steady beat of a life well loved. It was this quiet daily strength that would one day carry them through fire, shadow, and storm. But for now, it was simply life, and that, in the Shire, was more than enough. In the warm heart of the Shire, where the roads wind like rivers through green hills and wildflowers, every hobbit seems to know every other. There are few secrets in Hobbiton, fewer still in Bywater or Buckland, and family trees are remembered almost as well as recipes. For in the Shire, one's family isn't just a matter of blood, it's a matter of pride, of tradition, and of stories whispered across generations. Hobbits place great importance on ancestry. Lineage is more than just a record. It is a living part of who they are. A hobbit's name often carries with it the weight of reputation, both good and ill, and those names are worn with honor. Some families are known for their vast gardens, others for their bakery pies, and a few, just a few, are remembered for having changed the course of history. These are the families whose roots run deep and wide, their names etched into the quiet legacy of the Shire. Foremost among these are the Bagginses, a well-respected family of Baggins in Hobbiton. The Bagginses were known for their respectability, solid, practical, and predictable. They did not go on adventures. They did not meddle in wizard business. They lived in fine hobbit holes, kept well-stocked pantries, and never did anything unexpected. Or so it was, until Bilbo Baggins, son of Bungo and Belladonna Took, stepped out of his round green door one morning and vanished into legend. Bilbo's unexpected journey to the Lonely Mountain would forever change the standing of the Baggins name, making it one both revered and whispered about in equal measure. Bilbo's nephew and heir, Frodo Baggins, would carry the family name even further into the annals of history. Though born to Drogo Baggins and Primula Brandybuck, Frodo was raised by Bilbo and inherited not only Bag End, but also a deep sense of curiosity and courage. It was Frodo who would bear the burden of the One Ring, traveling beyond the Shire into the very heart of darkness, forever altering the future of Middle-earth and of hobbits. Closely tied to the Baggins family were the Tooks, long considered one of the oldest and most noble hobbit families. The Tooks hailed from the Westfarthing and held the hereditary office of Thane, the traditional head of the Shire's defense and leadership, though in practice the role had grown mostly ceremonial. Still, the Took name commanded attention. Tooks were known for being slightly peculiar, adventurous, curious, even reckless by hobbit standards. Family stories tell of Tooks who shot bows, talked to dwarves, or wandered too close to elven woods. One ancestor was said to have ridden a horse, a notion so unthinkable to most hobbits that it bordered on scandalous. The most famous Took of recent memory was Peregrine Took, or Pippin, son of Paladin II, the Tane. Cheerful, impulsive, and endlessly curious, Pippin's journey alongside Frodo and later with Gandalf would bring him from the fields of the Shire to the White Towers of Minas Tirith. In time, he would become the Tane himself and bring a touch of worldly wisdom to a role that had long been steeped in tradition. Another noble house of note was the Brandybuck family of Buckland, a region east of the Brandywine River. The Brandybucks were often seen as somewhat unorthodox by other hobbits living in a land partially outside the traditional borders of the Shire, near the Old Forest, and in large halls like Brandy Hall, a sprawling hobbit dwelling built into the side of Buck Hill. They were riverfolk, with a taste for boats and open-mindedness rarely seen in their western kin. Chief among the Brandybucks during the time of the War of the Ring was Meriadoc Brandybuck, or Merry. Intelligent, loyal, and brave, Merry was Frodo's cousin and one of the earliest to support his secret quest. Merry's keen mind, sense of history, and courage in battle made him an instrumental figure in the final struggle against Sauron. Like Pippin, he would return to the Shire a changed hobbit, wiser, stronger, and with tales few others could even imagine. Also of note were the Gamgees, a family of humble origins but great heart. The Gamgees had long been gardeners and laborers, respected for their honesty, work ethic, and warmth. The family's name was not grand, and few would have guessed that one of their own would one day walk beside a ring-bearer into Mordor itself. Samwise Gamgee, son of Hamfast, or Gaffer Gamgee, would become the soul of the Fellowship, the quiet strength behind Frodo's burden, and ultimately one of the greatest hobbits in history. His love for the Shire, for stories, for his garden, and for Frodo marked him as the truest embodiment of all the best hobbit traits. In time, he too would rise to honor serving as mayor of the Shire for many years and preserving the memory of the great quest for generations to come. Beyond these central families were many others, each with their own quirks and claims to fame. The Proudfeet, often remembered for their loud gatherings and notable toes, were related to the Bagginses through the broader Took and Bolger lines. The Bolgers, Boffins, Chubbs, and Hornblowers were all respectable and storied families as well, each known for their distinctive crafts, lands, or characters. The Hornblowers, for example, were renowned for growing the finest pipeweed in the South Farthing, while the Chubbs had a long-standing reputation for their skill in baking. Hobbit family trees were long, tangled, and sometimes hilariously complex. Genealogy was a serious hobby in the Shire. Books of family names and relationships like the famous Red Book of Westmarch, which recorded much of the Baggins and Took history, were treasured and passed down with reverence. It wasn't uncommon for a hobbit to recite 3 generations of ancestors at a birthday party, or to produce a dusty scroll detailing how his great-aunt's cousin once married into a distant branch of the Brandybucks. But beneath the names, the reputations, and the traditions, the heart of these families was always the same. They loved the land, they loved their homes, they loved each other. Even the Tooks, with their wild dreams, or the Brandybucks, with their river-faring ways, shared the same core values as the Gamgees who worked the gardens of Bagshot Row: hospitality, kindness, good food, and good company. These were the legacies every hobbit family cherished. And so, through generations of planting and feasting, of raising children and telling tales, these families wove the fabric of hobbit society. They passed on not only names, but wisdom and laughter, traditions and tenderness. The Shire was not held together by walls or laws, it was held together by these families, by the love that bloomed in every smile, and by the stories whispered from one age to the next. In a quiet hole in the ground, nestled beneath a perfectly round green door, lived a hobbit named Bilbo Baggins. He was, by all accounts, very respected most of all because he never did anything unexpected. He wore fine waistcoats, smoked his pipe on the porch in the evenings, and kept his pantry stocked with seed cakes, ale, and pickled onions. The neighbors knew they could rely on Bilbo Baggins for polite conversation, a warm fire, and absolutely no nonsense. But there was more to Bilbo than met the eye. Though a Baggins by name, through his mother Belladonna Took, he carried the blood of the Took's hobbits with a spark of wanderlust, known to do odd things like go on adventures or fraternize with elves. Most of the time, Bilbo kept this heritage buried deep, content with his books and his armchair. But fate, and a certain wizard named Gandalf, had other plans. One morning, without so much as a thunderclap or trumpet, Gandalf the Grey arrived on Bilbo's doorstep, bringing with him an offer that would shake the very foundations of Bilbo's orderly life, a chance to go on an adventure. At first, Bilbo refused. Adventures were messy. They made one late for dinner. But Gandalf, clever as always, was not finished. The next day, 13 dwarves began arriving at Bag End, one after another, until Bilbo's home was filled with beards, songs, laughter, and the smell of roasted mutton. Thorin Oakenshield, leader of the company, had a goal: to reclaim the lonely mountain from the dragon Smaug. Before Bilbo quite knew what had happened, he had been chosen as their burglar. At first, he fumbled through the journey. He was not a warrior, nor a burglar, nor brave in the usual sense. He missed his feather bed and teacups. He complained about meals and questioned the wisdom of leaving home. Yet, something within Bilbo began to stir, something ancient and quiet, as if generations of untested courage were waking up. As the company ventured through wild lands, over rivers and mountains, Bilbo began to change. He faced trolls and goblins, spiders and wolves. He wandered the dark of Gollum's cave and matched wits with a creature long corrupted by the power of a mysterious golden ring. It was here, in the black silence of the misty mountains, that Bilbo found, or was found, by the One Ring. At the time, it seemed no more than a curious trinket. Yet the riddle game he played with Gollum, and his clever escape, marked a turning point. It was the first moment Bilbo stood alone, faced death, and chose cunning over fear. From then on, he grew. He rescued the company from giant spiders in Mirkwood. He slipped past elves undetected. He confronted the dragon Smaug, not with sword or spell, but with riddles and nerve. And when Thorin, blinded by gold and pride, refused to share the reclaimed treasure with the people of Lake Town, it was Bilbo who gave away the Arkenstone, the prized heirloom of the dwarves, to broker peace. It was an act of wisdom, of courage, and of heart. In the end, Bilbo returned to the Shire with treasures untold yet poorer in the eyes of his neighbors. During his long absence, he had been presumed dead, his belongings auctioned off, and his name sullied by scandal. A hobbit who went off and returned again was never quite trusted. They called him eccentric. They whispered about his strange guests and late-night walks. Yet Bilbo didn't mind. He had seen too much of the world to care about gossip. He had written his memoirs, There and Back Again, and spent his days quietly in his garden, pipe in hand, thoughts often far away. But the ring he brought back, that curious golden band, would not remain silent. Bilbo's journey marked a turning point in the history of hobbits. He had proven that their kind, often overlooked and underestimated, could be brave, clever, and wise. He had shown that even the smallest person could shape the course of the future, and he had unwittingly set the stage for the great conflict that was yet to come. Though he did not know it, Bilbo's adventures would ripple outward. The ring he carried, once belonging to Sauron himself, would become the catalyst for the War of the Ring. And the quiet nephew he adopted, Frodo Baggins, would inherit both the ring and the burden it carried. Still, within the pages of Bilbo's story, one finds not the tale of a warrior or conqueror, but of a hobbit, a small, round, gentle-hearted creature who dared to leave home, not for glory, but for friendship, for curiosity, and, in the end, for the right thing. In him lived the spirit of the Tooks, the wisdom of the Bagginses, and the courage of all hobbits. Bilbo's unexpected journey became legend, not because it was filled with dragons and gold, but because it reminded the world of something essential. That courage can be quiet, That strength can come with bare feet and a teacup in hand, and that sometimes, even in the most respectable hole in the ground, lives a heart capable of changing the world. Long before Frodo carried it to the fires of Mount Doom, before even Bilbo crept through the darkness of the misty mountains to find it, the One Ring had begun its slow, corrupting crawl back into the world. Forged in the fires of Orodruin by the Dark Lord Sauron himself, the ring was not merely a tool of power, it was a shard of Sauron's very will, a whispering, watching force designed to bend others to darkness. And for many ages it was lost, forgotten, waiting, until, by fate or design, it came into the possession of a creature most unlike the great warriors or kings who had once sought it, a hobbit. Though not a hobbit in the traditional sense, Smeagol, the ring's first halfling bearer, was of a people very close in ancestry to the Stoors, one of the early divisions of the hobbit race. On the banks of the river Anduin, Smeagol found the ring on his birthday, shortly after it slipped from the hand of Isildur in a desperate escape centuries before. He did not know its name nor its purpose. All he knew was that he wanted it, and that he killed his cousin Déagol to keep it. In that moment, the ring revealed its first terrible truth. It did not simply corrupt over time, it corrupted immediately. Smeagol retreated into the mountains, into shadow, into madness. He became Gollum, a withered thing consumed by the ring's whispering hunger. For 5 centuries, he hid beneath the misty mountains, hoarding his precious, forgetting the world, forgotten by it in turn. Yet in the grand design of Middle-earth, such isolation could not last. The ring was not meant to stay hidden. It wanted to be found. Enter Bilbo Baggins. In what seemed like an accident of fate, or perhaps an orchestrated moment of cosmic balance, Bilbo stumbled into Gollum's cave during his unexpected journey with Thorin Oakenshield's company. There, in darkness, they played a game of riddles. The stakes, Bilbo's life. The outcome, the ring, lost by Gollum, found by Bilbo, and with that, the ring changed hands once again. Bilbo did not know what he had found. The ring, to him, was a useful trinket, a magic ring that turned him invisible, helpful for escaping spiders or irate dwarves. But from the moment he slipped it onto his finger, the ring began its work. It fed on secrecy. It amplified possessiveness. Though Bilbo remained largely untouched by its deeper corruption, his unnatural longevity and growing attachment to the ring were early signs of its influence. He called it "my precious" in moments of stress. He became oddly protective of it, even as he tried to go on living as a respectable hobbit. It was Gandalf, wise and watchful, who first sensed that something was amiss. Decades after Bilbo's return to the Shire, the wizard began to question the true nature of the ring Bilbo had found. Bilbo, now well past his 100th birthday and still as sprightly as ever, was preparing to leave the Shire. He intended to give everything to Frodo, his home, his treasure, even the ring. But when the time came, he hesitated. He clutched it, argued, cried, and only through Gandalf's gentle but firm intervention did he finally let it go. That moment marked a crucial shift in the history of the Hobbits. For while they had always been a secluded people, simple, peaceful, removed from the great struggles of elves and men, they now stood on the very threshold of Middle-earth's fate. The ring had entered the Shire. It had been passed from Bilbo to Frodo, and its presence, however subtle, had begun to bend the currents of history. Frodo Baggins, Bilbo's heir and adoptive son, inherited not just the ring, but the responsibility it carried. For many years he lived quietly at Bag End, unaware of the weight he bore. But the ring's power was growing. Sauron had risen once more in Mordor, and the Eye was turning westward, searching for what was lost. When Gandalf finally returned to the Shire with the truth that Frodo's ring was the One Ring, and that it must be destroyed, everything changed. The Hobbits, long forgotten by the world, were now thrust into its center. Frodo, Samwise Gamgee, Meriadoc Brandybuck, and Peregrine took all simple hobbits with no swords, no armies, no titles, would leave the Shire and step into legend. Their journey would cross kingdoms and battlefields, but the true struggle was always within. The ring did not destroy with fire, it destroyed with temptation. It offered safety, power, survival, and in doing so, it tested the very heart of its bearer. Frodo carried the ring to Mordor, suffering under its weight. He lost sleep, appetite, even his sense of self. Slowly, quietly, it worked upon him. He grew paranoid, distrustful. He pushed away friends. The closer he came to Mount Doom, the more the ring tried to claim him. And in the end, standing at the very edge of the fire, Frodo could not let it go. He claimed it, called it his own. It was Gollum, driven by obsession, who bit the ring from Frodo's finger and in doing so, fulfilled the ring's final purpose. As he fell into the fire, still clutching his precious, the ring was unmade. Evil undid itself. And Middle-earth was saved, not by strength or might, but by mercy, pity, and the resilience of a hobbit's heart. The influence of the ring on Hobbit history cannot be overstated. It turned quiet lives into epics. It revealed that beneath the surface of their comfort and cheer, hobbits carried a quiet strength, a deep moral core capable of withstanding even the greatest darkness. It also left scars Frodo never fully recovered. Though the Shire was saved, he could not find peace in it. The ring had changed him, wounded him in ways that even time could not heal. In the end, he sailed west with the elves, into the Undying Lands, seeking rest. Bilbo, too, aged and weary, made the journey. Their part in the story had ended, but the tale of the hobbits would never again be one of obscurity. The ring, forged in evil, had touched their lives, but it could not conquer them. Through their endurance, the world saw what it had long forgotten, that greatness can come from the smallest of places, and that even the quietest voices can carry the power to change the fate of all. In the heart of the Shire, nestled among green hills and winding lanes, lived a young hobbit named Frodo Baggins. Orphaned at a young age and adopted by his eccentric uncle Bilbo, Frodo had grown up in the comfortable walls of Bag End, surrounded by books, laughter, and the simple joys of hobbit life. He was kind, thoughtful, and curious, but no one, not even Frodo himself, suspected that he would one day carry the fate of Middle-earth on his shoulders. Frodo's story begins quietly, like most tales in the Shire. He was content with his routines, loved the countryside, and enjoyed the company of his friends, especially Samwise Gamgee, his loyal gardener and companion. For many years, Frodo lived in peace, unaware that in a small wooden box tucked away in Bag End, there lay a power far beyond his understanding. The ring, once belonging to Sauron, now rested in his possession. When Bilbo left the Shire on his 11th birthday, he entrusted everything to Frodo: his home, his writings, and most importantly, the ring. At first, it seemed a mere trinket, but it did not remain quiet for long. As the power of the Dark Lord began to stir again in the east, the ring began to awaken. Its whispers grew stronger, its presence heavier. And when Gandalf finally returned to Bag End with grim news that the ring was, in truth, the one ring of power, Frodo's life changed forever. With the fires of Mordor burning anew, and Sauron's servants already searching, Frodo made a choice that no other hobbit had ever been asked to make. He chose to leave the Shire, not to seek adventure or glory, but to protect the land and people he loved. He understood, even then, that there was no returning to the way things had been. That with the ring came not power or prestige, but suffering. So began Frodo's long and harrowing journey. From the moment he stepped onto the East Road with Sam at his side, Frodo was pursued by black riders, by spies of the enemy, and by the weight of the ring itself. In Bree, he met Aragorn, the mysterious ranger who would become one of his fiercest protectors. At Rivendell, a great council was held, and a fellowship was formed. Men, elves, dwarves, and hobbits united in a single purpose: to destroy the ring in the fires of Mount Doom. Though offered the protection of warriors far mightier than himself, Frodo knew deep down that the ring was his burden to bear. He alone could feel its pull, its desire to return to its master. And so, when the fellowship fractured at Amon Hen, he chose solitude, or nearly, for Sam, ever faithful, refused to let him go alone. Together, they turned south, leaving behind the last safety they would know for many long months. The burden of the ring grew heavier with each step. It was not merely a physical weight, but a spiritual one. It invaded Frodo's thoughts, twisted his emotions, and filled his dreams with fire and shadow. He became wary, secretive, and at times, cold. Yet through it all, he pressed on through the dead marshes, past the Black Gate, and into the desolate realm of Mordor itself. Their path was not walked alone. Gollum, the creature once known as Smeagol, slithered into their company, both guide and thread. Frodo, seeing in Gollum a reflection of what he might become, treated him with pity, and perhaps even hope. He believed Gollum could be redeemed. It was this mercy, often criticized, that would ultimately save the quest. For though Gollum betrayed them at Shelob's lair, leading Frodo to be poisoned and captured, his role in the story was not yet over. In the dark halls of Cirith Ungol and the ash-strewn plains of Mordor, Frodo was pushed to the brink. He bore the ring across broken lands, with nothing left but Sam's unwavering loyalty and the dim hope of completion. By the time they reached Mount Doom, Frodo was a shadow of the Hobbit who had once strolled the lanes of Hobbiton. He was thin, pale, and broken, but still, he climbed. And then, at the very edge of success, he failed. At the heart of the volcano, with the ring poised to be unmade, Frodo could not let it go. After all the sacrifice, all the suffering, the ring claimed him. "The ring is mine," he declared, and placed it upon his finger. But it was Gollum, desperate, mad Gollum, who intervened. In a final struggle, he bit the ring from Frodo's hand and fell, laughing, into the fire below. The ring was destroyed. Sauron was defeated. The world was saved not through Frodo's strength, but through the tangled web of mercy, chance, and fate. Frodo's journey did not end with the fall of Barad-dûr. He returned to the Shire with Sam, Merry, and Pippin, only to find it scarred by war and corruption. He led its healing, helped restore its peace, but he no longer felt at home. The Shire had remained, but Frodo had changed. The wound left by the Morgul blade, the ache of the ring's loss, and the memories of what he had seen and done lingered like ghosts. He tried to write, to live, to smile, but peace would not take root in his heart. And so, when the time came, he sailed across the sea with the elves and Gandalf into the west, into healing, not because he had failed, but because he had given everything. Frodo's story is not one of conquest, but of endurance, of bearing pain for the sake of others, of sacrificing home, comfort, and innocence in order to protect what was good in the world. He did not seek greatness, but it found him. And through it all, he remained at his core a hobbit, a creature of gentleness, resilience, and quiet strength. The burden of destiny left scars, yes, but it also revealed something timeless, that even the smallest person can carry the weight of the world, and that courage is not found in strength or fury, but in choosing to continue step by step against all odds. Meriadoc Brandybuck and Peregrine Took, better known simply as Merry and Pippin, began their lives much like any other young hobbits in the Shire, full of boundless energy, mischief, and a love of good food, warm fires, and friendship. Born into two of the most prominent hobbit families, Merry hailing from the Brandybucks of Buckland and Pippin from the Tooks of the Westfarthing, the two were cousins by blood and inseparable companions by choice. Together, they roamed the rolling green hills of the Shire, playing pranks on neighbors, sneaking late snacks from kitchens, and living life as carefree young hobbits do. But as their story would prove, there was far more to these two than youthful folly. Beneath their laughter lay courage, loyalty, and a spark of greatness that would burn brighter than anyone in their quiet homeland could have imagined. The early years of Merry and Pippin were steeped in the familiar comforts and rhythms of hobbit life. They learned the importance of community, the pleasure of simple pleasures, pipeweed, ale, parties, and the strength found in friendships that last a lifetime. Yet, Even as they delighted in their youthful escapades, there was a quiet sense that their destiny would soon call them beyond the borders of their peaceful Shire. Their moment came when Frodo Baggins, their dear friend and fellow Hobbit, set out on a dangerous quest to destroy the One Ring, a journey that would shape the fate of Middle-earth itself. Though Merry and Pippin did not carry the burden of the ring, they chose to accompany Frodo and Samwise Gamgee, joining the Fellowship of the Ring in a mission that was fraught with peril and shadow. Their decision to leave the Shire was met with a mix of excitement and trepidation. They were hobbits who had never ventured far from home, now thrust into a world where orcs lurked and ancient powers stirred. At Amon Hen, during a fierce attack by the forces of darkness, the Fellowship was broken. Merry and Pippin were captured by orcs, beginning a harrowing chapter in their lives. Despite the grim circumstances, their spirits were unbroken. Their resilience and quick thinking allowed them to escape captivity deep within Fangorn Forest. There, the two encountered the Ents, the ancient tree herders, massive, slow-moving beings who were the guardians of the forest. It was through Merry and Pippin's earnest pleas and impassioned words that the Ents awoke to the devastation wrought by Saruman, the treacherous wizard, and took up arms against him. This led to the legendary assault on Isengard, where the Ents destroyed Saruman's fortress and ended his dark designs. The courage of these two hobbits, once little more than playful pranksters, had helped turn the tide of the war. Merry's journey took him to the plains of Rohan, where he became a squire and close companion to King Theoden. Though small in stature, Merry demonstrated bravery beyond measure. At the Battle of the Pelennor Fields, he fought alongside men and warriors, wielding sword and shield against the forces of Mordor. His defining moment came when he aided King Theoden in confronting the Witch King of Angmar, the Lord of the Nazgul, when the fearsome enemy sought to smite the king. Merry's courage and quick thinking helped to break the Witch King's power, a deed prophesied to be impossible for any man but accomplished by the hands of a hobbit. This act elevated Merry's status from Hobbit of the Shire to a hero celebrated throughout Middle-earth. Meanwhile, Pippin found himself in the great city of Minas Tirith, serving as a page to Denethor, the steward of Gondor. Despite his youth and inexperience, Pippin's honesty, good humor, and unwavering loyalty earned him trust and respect in the courts of men. During the siege of Minas Tirith, Pippin's bravery shone through in crucial moments, most notably when he lit the beacon fires atop the mountains to call for aid from Rohan, a signal that ultimately led to the arrival of King Theoden's riders and the salvation of the city. Pippin's heart was ever steadfast, even in the face of overwhelming darkness. Through their experiences, Merry and Pippin grew from spirited youths into seasoned warriors and wise leaders. Yet, no matter how far their paths took them from the familiar fields and hedgerows of the Shire, their hearts remained tethered to home. They never lost the warmth and humor that defined them as hobbits, and they returned carrying the lessons of their journey, lessons of bravery, sacrifice, and hope. When the war was won and Sauron's shadow lifted, Merry and Pippin returned to find the Shire changed in their absence. Saruman, having been defeated in Isengard, sought revenge by sending his henchmen to seize the peaceful land. The Shire was invaded, its fields trampled, its people oppressed. But Merry and Pippin would not stand idle. Drawing upon the strength and wisdom gained from their travels, they led the hobbits in what became known as the Scouring of the Shire, a determined effort to reclaim their homeland, drive out the invaders, and restore peace. It was a campaign that showed the Shire that even its smallest inhabitants could be formidable defenders of freedom. Merry and Pippin's leadership during the Scouring was instrumental. They rallied their fellow hobbits, organized resistance, and confronted Saruman himself when he came to the Shire, facing down the once powerful wizard with courage born of experience and conviction. Their actions ensured that the Shire would not only survive but thrive, free once again from tyranny. In the years that followed, Merry became the master of Buckland, overseeing his family's lands with wisdom and care, while Pippin assumed the prestigious office of Thane of the Shire, a position held by the Took family for generations. Both men lived long, fulfilling lives, their deeds and leadership remembered and honored by all hobbits. The transformation of Merry and Pippin from mischievous boys to noble heroes is one of the most enduring tales in Hobbit history. Their story serves as a reminder that greatness often lies hidden beneath the surface, and that even the smallest among us can rise to meet the greatest challenges. Their courage and friendship exemplify the heart of Hobbit kind, steadfast, joyful, and brave in the face of darkness. In the quiet twilight of their lives, both Merry and Pippin would be celebrated not just as warriors and leaders, but as symbols of hope and resilience. Their journeys remind us that adventure can begin with a simple step beyond the familiar, that loyalty can forge unbreakable bonds, and that laughter and courage often walk hand in hand, even amid the shadow of war. Their legacy continues to inspire, a testament to the enduring spirit of the hobbits, the humble, the hardy, the unexpectedly heroic. The Shire had long been a land of peace, quiet, and simple pleasures. Rolling hills dotted with neat hobbit holes, bubbling streams, lush gardens, and the familiar laughter of neighbors formed the backdrop of a way of life cherished by the hobbits for generations. The Shire was a sanctuary, a place where the cares of the wider world seemed distant, where the greatest concerns were harvests, parties, and the occasional curious visitor. But when Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin returned from their epic quest to destroy the One Ring, they found a Shire that was not the safe haven they had left behind. Years had passed, and in their absence, dark forces had taken hold. The Shire was changed, scarred, and under the shadow of tyranny. Its green fields and peaceful lanes had been invaded and defiled. What had happened? After Saruman the White's defeat at Isengard, the once wise and powerful wizard was reduced to bitterness and hatred. His schemes had failed, his influence shattered, and with nothing left in Isengard, he turned his wrath to the Shire. Though small and seemingly insignificant in the eyes of the great powers of Middle-earth, the Shire was not beyond the reach of evil. Saruman sent a band of ruffians, rough men, and cutthroats, often called Sharky's men, to seize control of the Shire. These men terrorized the hobbits, burning trees, polluting rivers, and stealing livestock. They imposed harsh rules, destroyed property, and spread fear among the peaceful folk. The fields were left fallow, the roads neglected, and the markets once full of cheerful voices fell silent. The hobbits were stunned. Many were too frightened to resist. Some submitted, while others fled. The vibrant community was broken. It was as though the Shire had been invaded by a dark storm that threatened to wash away the very heart of Hobbit life. Yet, despite the despair, the spirit of the hobbits was not broken. Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin, though weary and worn from their long and perilous journey, refused to accept the destruction of their home. They saw clearly that their beloved Shire needed them more than ever, not just as travelers who had faced great evils in distant lands, but as leaders and protectors ready to stand for what was right. The four friends gathered the remaining hobbits who still held hope in their hearts. They shared what they had learned about courage, loyalty, and the power of standing together. Merry and Pippin, seasoned warriors now, took up leadership roles, inspiring the others with their bravery and resolve. Sam, with his unyielding love for the Shire and its people, rallied the farmers, gardeners, and shopkeepers. Frodo, despite his physical and emotional wounds, stood as a symbol of resilience. This marked the beginning of what came to be known as the Scouring of the Shire, a campaign to reclaim their homeland, drive out the invaders, and restore peace and prosperity. Unlike the epic battles of Gondor or Rohan, the fight in the Shire was quiet but no less fierce. The hobbits relied on their intimate knowledge of the land, the secret paths through woods and fields, hidden hollows, and old tunnels. They used their skills in stealth, patience, and community to undermine the invaders. Raids and ambushes disrupted the ruffians. Supplies were stolen, roads blocked, and traps set. The hobbits, once considered simple and harmless, showed cunning and determination that surprised their enemies. The ruffians grew wary and frustrated, unable to maintain their grip. One of the most pivotal moments came when the hobbits confronted Saruman himself. The fallen wizard had taken refuge in Bag End, the very home of Frodo Baggins, now a place symbolizing resistance and hope. Saruman, once a lord of great power, was now but a shadow, prideful, angry, and desperate. The hobbits stood united, confronting Saruman with unyielding resolve. Their courage was a testament to how far they had come from the carefree youths of the Shire to defenders of their land. The final defeat of Saruman in the Shire was not through mighty magic or grand armies, but by the strength of a community bound by love and determination. Following Saruman's fall, the hobbits worked tirelessly to heal their land. Trees were replanted to replace those felled. Gardens were restored, homes repaired, and the familiar sounds of laughter and song returned. Market days resumed with renewed vigor, and the Shire's festivals blossomed once more. The Scouring also had lasting effects on the hobbits themselves. They had seen the dangers that lurked beyond their borders and understood that peace was precious but fragile. Their experience taught them that courage and vigilance were necessary to protect the simple joys of life. This chapter in Hobbit history serves as a powerful reminder that even the smallest and most unassuming peoples have the strength to resist darkness. The hobbits of the Shire, with their love for home and each other, showed that resilience and unity can overcome even the most daunting threats. Through the Scouring, the hobbits reclaimed not just their land, but their identity. They proved that they were more than just peaceful dwellers. They were guardians of a way of life worth fighting for. The Shire would never be the same again, but it would endure stronger and wiser, a symbol of hope and renewal for Middle-earth. The courage of Frodo, Sam, Merry, Pippin, and their fellow hobbits would be remembered for generations, inspiring all who valued peace, friendship, and the simple beauty of home. The story of the Hobbits is one of the most remarkable threads woven into the vast tapestry of Middle-earth's history. Though small in stature and often overlooked by the great kingdoms of men, elves, and dwarves, the Hobbits' influence would prove profound, both in their immediate age and in the generations to come. Their legacy is not one of swords and crowns, but of peace, resilience, and an enduring spirit that would echo through the ages. For centuries before the War of the Ring, hobbits lived quietly and contentedly in the Shire, their lives defined by simplicity and an unassuming love of home, family, and nature. Their culture emphasized comfort, community, and continuity principles that made them seem detached from the grand struggles unfolding beyond their borders. Their world was one of well-tended gardens, festive gatherings, and the enjoyment of the everyday. Yet it was precisely this grounded way of life that shaped the hobbits into uniquely resilient beings capable of great endurance and steadfastness when the moment demanded. The arrival of the One Ring in Hobbit hands, first through Bilbo and later Frodo, marked a turning point not just in the fate of Middle-earth, but in how the hobbits came to be seen. Theirs was a tale of unlikely heroism. It was not the strength of arms or the power of magic that would vanquish Sauron, but the quiet courage of 4 small hobbits who carried burdens far heavier than their size suggested. Frodo Baggins' perilous journey to Mount Doom stands as the central pillar of this legacy. Through trials of shadow, doubt, and overwhelming temptation, Frodo bore the ring, a symbol of ultimate power and corruption. His success was not a matter of brute strength, but of spirit, sacrifice, and mercy. His endurance showed that true heroism is often found in the willingness to suffer for the sake of others, and in the capacity to show kindness even to those lost in darkness. Samwise Gamgee, Frodo's steadfast companion, embodied the very heart of Hobbit resilience. His loyalty, humility, and boundless love for Frodo and the Shire proved a shield against the ring's corrupting influence. Sam's courage in the face of despair is a testament to the strength found in friendship and hope, teaching that even the simplest among us can alter the course of history. Meanwhile, Merry and Pippin's transformation from merry pranksters into warriors and leaders further demonstrated the hidden depths of Hobbit character. Their deeds at Isengard and on the fields of Pelennor, their leadership in the Scouring of the Shire, revealed that courage is not reserved for the mighty alone. Their growth symbolized the capacity for change and greatness in the most unassuming hearts. This legacy reshaped the perceptions of hobbits throughout Middle-earth. No longer were they merely pastoral folk to be ignored or patronized. They were respected for their vital role in the struggle against darkness, and their embodiment of virtues often overshadowed by martial might. Friendships forged during the War of the Ring between hobbits and other races, elves, men, and dwarves, fostered new bonds of understanding and cooperation that helped heal the fractured lands. In the years after Sauron's defeat, the hobbits embraced their new role with humility and grace. Leaders such as Samwise Gamgee, who served as mayor of the Shire for many years, worked tirelessly to restore and strengthen their communities. The Shire, though scarred by the events of the Scouring and the burden of the war, blossomed and new fields were replanted, homes rebuilt, and the warmth of festivals and fellowship returned. The hobbits reaffirmed their commitment to the simple, wholesome life that defined them, while embracing the lessons learned through hardship. Moreover, the stories of Hobbit heroism were preserved and passed down through generations, notably in the Red Book of Westmarch, compiled initially by Bilbo, continued by Frodo, and finally completed by Sam. This record not only chronicled their adventures, but served as a beacon of hope and courage, inspiring future generations to remember the power of kindness, endurance, and loyalty. Beyond the borders of the Shire, the influence of the hobbits carried subtle but enduring weight. Their example encouraged other peoples to value humility and perseverance. Their victory over overwhelming darkness without armies or kingship stood as a powerful message that true strength lies in heart and spirit, not just in might. The legacy of the hobbits also carried a deep cultural significance. Their love of peace and nature, their reverence for home and hearth, became symbols of what was worth protecting in Middle-earth's fragile balance. They reminded all that even in times of great conflict, the preservation of everyday joys and community is paramount. In the wider narrative of Middle-earth, the Hobbit's story offers a counterbalance to tales of epic battles and grand kingdoms. It highlights the vital role of the small folk, whose quiet courage and resilience form the foundation upon which the future is built. Their influence is felt in the restored realms of men, the lingering friendships with elves and dwarves, and the enduring peace that follows the war. Today, the Shire remains a land of beauty and joy, where laughter echoes through the hills and the rhythms of nature dictate the pace of life. The spirit of the hobbits endures in every garden tended, every feast shared, and every friendship forged. Their legacy is a testament to the power of kindness, humility, and steadfastness, a reminder that greatness often comes from the most unassuming places. Through the ages, the story of the hobbits continues to inspire those who seek courage in adversity, who cherish peace in turbulent times, and who believe that even the smallest among us can change the fate of the world. Their journey from quiet folk of the Shire to the saviors of Middle-earth is a timeless tale of hope, resilience, and the enduring strength of the heart. As the shadows of the Third Age receded and the Fourth Age dawned upon Middle-earth, the world around the Shire began to change in subtle and profound ways. The great realms of Men Gondor, restored under King Elisar, Arnor's northern territories healing after long strife, and the fading enclaves of elves preparing to sail west, signaled a new era. Dwarves rebuilt their halls and reopened their mines, while the lands beyond Middle-earth's familiar borders whispered of mysteries yet unexplored. Yet amid this sweeping change, the Shire remained a peaceful refuge, a place where time seemed to flow gently and traditions endured. But even here, in the quietest corner of Middle-earth, the future beckoned, shaped by the lessons of the past and the promise of new generations. The hobbits who grew up after the War of the Ring inherited a world vastly different from that of their ancestors. They listened wide-eyed to the stories told by their elders, tales of Frodo's perilous journey to Mount Doom, Sam's unwavering loyalty and simple heroism, Merry and Pippin's transformation from jovial pranksters into brave warriors, and the great battles fought in distant lands. These stories were more than legend. They were living memory, instilling in the young hobbits a sense of identity, deeply rooted in courage, friendship, and selflessness. Education within the Shire blossomed as well. Where once the focus had been solely on farming, crafting, and local lore, the new era saw an embrace of wider knowledge. The younger hobbits learned not only the care of the earth and the art of cooking, but also the histories of men, elves, and dwarves, languages, and the importance of governance and stewardship. This broadened perspective enriched Hobbit culture, preparing them for a future that, while peaceful, was never guaranteed to remain so. The Shire itself grew in prosperity and vibrancy. Its farms expanded beyond familiar fields. Markets flourished with new goods and crafts, brought by traveling merchants. The festivals, such as the famous midsummer celebrations and Bilbo's 11th birthday party, became grander and more joyous, reflecting both the enduring Hobbit love for festivity and a renewed spirit of hope and unity. Yet, for all the prosperity and growth, the Hobbits remained deeply protective of their traditions and wary of rapid change. Their cautious nature, honed over centuries of living in a relatively sheltered land, tempered their openness with prudence. They valued hospitality and neighborliness, where every face was familiar and every visitor greeted with warmth, but also with a discerning eye. Leadership of the Shire passed peacefully from the hands of the original Fellowship members and their contemporaries to the next generation. Descendants of the Bagginses, Tooks, Brandybucks, and Gamgees took up positions as mayors, masters, and thanes. These new leaders, inspired by the examples of Samwise Gamgee and others, worked to balance progress with preservation, ensuring that the Shire remained a haven of peace and simple living, even as it cautiously opened to the world. Beyond the borders of the Shire, the influence of the Hobbits quietly yet profoundly spread. Their story, one of quiet courage, unassuming heroism, and steadfast friendship, served as an inspiration to many peoples of Middle-earth. Leaders in Gondor and Rohan often spoke of the humility and perseverance the Hobbits exemplified. Elves in Rivendell and Lothlorien held the Hobbits' deeds in high regard, and dwarves respected their resilience and loyalty. The friendships formed during the War of the Ring endured as bridges between cultures. Hobbits found themselves participating more actively in trade and diplomacy, acting as envoys and messengers across Middle-earth. Though their preference was always for the quiet and comfort of their homeland, the new generation understood that their place in the wider world was important not as conquerors or rulers, but as connectors and preservers of peace. Trade routes from the Shire grew busier, welcoming caravans bearing goods from distant lands, rare spices, finely wrought crafts, and tales from afar. Hobbit merchants and artisans gained a reputation for quality and integrity. Travelers and pilgrims came to the Shire, drawn by its peaceful reputation and the warmth of its people. This exchange enriched both the Hobbits and their neighbors, fostering mutual respect and understanding. Yet, with these changes came new challenges. The memory of darkness, war, and the shadow of Sauron lingered in the hearts of many. Though peace reigned, the Hobbits never forgot the hard-won lessons of vigilance and unity. They passed down to their children the importance of courage, not the loud bravery of warriors charging into battle, but the quiet courage of standing firm in the face of adversity, of protecting home and hearth with determination. The Hobbits cultivated a spirit of resilience, teaching that peace is precious but fragile. This outlook shaped their society, encouraging cooperation and kindness, but also readiness to defend what they cherished. They remained watchful, aware that the world beyond was vast and sometimes unpredictable. In their daily lives, Hobbits continued to honor the rhythms of nature, planting and harvesting, tending gardens and orchards, celebrating the cycles of the moon and Sunday. The party tree, a symbol of unity and joy, continued to host grand gatherings where songs and laughter filled the air, linking past and present in a continuum of community spirit. Family remained central to Hobbit life. Large households filled with children, elders, and kin reflected the importance of continuity and legacy. Elders shared wisdom and stories, while children grew up steeped in the values of kindness, honesty, and courage. The lineage of great hobbits Bilbo, Frodo, Sam, Merry, and Pippin became a source of pride and inspiration, reminding each generation that even the smallest hand can shape the course of history. Thus, The story of the Hobbits continued not as a closed chapter, but as a living journey. Their past heroism informed their present peace, and their hopeful eyes looked toward the future with a steadfast heart. In a world where kingdoms rise and fall, and the winds of change sweep across the lands, the Shire remained a steadfast island of warmth and light. Its people, bound by love of home and each other, carried forward a legacy born from courage, sacrifice, and an unyielding belief in the power of friendship and hope. The new generations of hobbits, nurtured by the lessons of the past and the blessings of peace, stood ready to meet whatever came next, not with swords drawn, but with hearts open, hands ready to work, and spirits unbowed. And so, beneath the gentle shade of the party tree, and amidst the rolling hills of green, the future of the hobbits unfolded a testament to the enduring strength of the small, the humble, and the brave. The culture of the hobbits is as rich and vibrant as the rolling green hills of their beloved Shire. Though often underestimated due to their small stature and simple lifestyles, hobbits possess a complex and deeply rooted culture that has withstood the test of time, wars, and sweeping changes across Middle-earth. To truly appreciate the enduring legacy of the hobbits, one must delve beyond their famous deeds and adventures, and explore the very essence of their way of life, their traditions, values, and the spirit that binds their communities together. At the very heart of Hobbit culture lies an unwavering love for home and hearth. Hobbit holes, the distinctive dwellings dug into hillsides, are more than mere homes. They are reflections of the hobbits' harmonious relationship with nature. These cozy, circular door homes are designed with comfort and warmth in mind, blending seamlessly with the landscape. Inside, fireplaces crackle with inviting warmth, pantries brim with preserves and delicacies, and windows open to vibrant gardens blooming with flowers, herbs, and vegetables. This connection to the land is more than practical. It is a spiritual bond, a respect for the earth that nurtures them and that they nurture in return. Food holds a central place in Hobbit life, transcending mere sustenance to become a form of celebration, community bonding, and cultural expression. Hobbits are famous throughout Middle-earth for their love of meals 6, or sometimes even 7, a day if possible. These meals, breakfast, second breakfast, elevenses, luncheon, afternoon tea, dinner, and supper, are eagerly anticipated occasions that bring families and friends together. Each meal is an opportunity not only to satisfy hunger, but to share stories, laughter, and companionship. The variety and richness of Hobbit fare, from seed cakes to ale and pipeweed, reflect their zest for life's simple pleasures. Festivals and feasts are lavish and joyous, filling the Shire with music, dance, fireworks, and mirth. Community and social traditions form the backbone of Hobbit society. Hobbits cherish their neighbors and kin, placing great importance on relationships and social harmony. Festivals such as the Harvest Festival and Midsummer's Eve are annual highlights, filled with games, dancing, and storytelling. Birthday parties, too, hold special significance, most famously the 11th birthday of Bilbo Baggins, an event marked by unparalleled festivities. These celebrations do more than entertain. They reaffirm social bonds, foster a sense of belonging, and pass down cultural values through generations. Hospitality is another defining trait of Hobbit culture. Visitors, whether known or strangers, are welcomed warmly and generously. Offering food, shelter, and kindness to guests is a matter of pride and principle. Despite their love of privacy and caution toward outsiders, Hobbits understand that generosity builds trust and goodwill, essential for peaceful coexistence. This hospitality extends even to those from distant lands, reflecting an openness that, while tempered by prudence, enriches their society. Beneath these joyful customs and cozy comforts lies a remarkable spirit of resilience and quiet strength. The history of the Hobbits, marked by episodes such as the Scouring of the Shire, reveals a people capable of extraordinary bravery and unity when their home is threatened. Far from the image of timid country folk, Hobbits demonstrated that courage need not roar. It can be steadfast and determined, emerging from love for home and community. Their resistance to Saruman's tyranny showcased their ability to organize, fight, and prevail against oppression. The values cherished by hobbits, honesty, humility, kindness, and loyalty, are woven into the fabric of their daily lives. They prize good-heartedness and simple wisdom over grand ambitions or displays of power. Hobbits respect fairness and goodwill, and their leaders, mayors, thanes, and masters are chosen for their trustworthiness and dedication to service rather than for any desire for glory. This egalitarian ethos fosters a society where cooperation and empathy flourish, and where the voices of even the smallest or quietest members are heard and valued. Storytelling is deeply ingrained in Hobbit culture and plays a vital role in preserving history, imparting morals, and strengthening communal identity. Oral traditions flourish alongside written records, such as the famous Red Book of Westmarch, originally penned by Bilbo Baggins and later continued by Frodo and Samwise Gamgee. These stories recount adventures, hardships, and lessons, inspiring new generations and connecting the present with the past. Through stories, hobbits pass on their heritage, ensuring that the sacrifices and triumphs of their ancestors are never forgotten. The enduring spirit of the hobbits is marked by a rare and extraordinary balance of humility and strength. They embody a quiet heroism, one that prefers peace but stands ready to defend what is precious. Their lives are celebrated through the rhythm of simple joys: the planting of a garden, the sharing of a meal, the telling of a tale beneath the party tree. They value friendship, family, and a life lived in harmony with the natural world. In the grander narrative of Middle-earth, the hobbits offer a poignant reminder that true greatness is not measured by power or dominion but by heart, perseverance, and the ability to nurture peace. Their culture, values, and spirit form the cornerstone of their legacy, a legacy that transcends time and continues to inspire those who hear their story. As evening falls over the Shire and the glow of lanterns lights Hobbit windows, the enduring spirit of the hobbits shines bright, quiet, but unyielding, a beacon of hope, kindness, and the timeless strength of home.